The clink of a silver fork against a crystal glass was the last sound of peace Amelia Hayes would know. Surrounded by the opulent wealth of her husband's family, in a dining room dripping with chandeliers and unspoken judgment, J. Croft stood up. His voice, usually a source of comfort, cut through the air like shattering ice. And with 4 devastating words, he set her world on fire. The baby isn't mine. He expected her to crumble. He expected tears and shame. He didn't expect that by the next morning, a single piece of paper would not only prove him wrong, but expose a lie so toxic it would threaten to burn his entire family's empire to the ground. The Sunday evening light, thick and golden, slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, painting long, distorted stripes across the white marble floors. From this height, 30 stories above the relentless energy of Chicago, the city looked like a circuit board, a complex and beautiful machine that Amelia Hayes had never quite felt a part of. She ran a hand over the gentle, firm swell of her stomach, a 7-month curve that was both a promise and, increasingly, a source of profound anxiety. Her husband, J. Croft, stood by the window, his back to her. He was a statue, carved from success, dressed in a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than her first car. His shoulders were tense, the muscles in his neck corded, as he stared down at the kingdom his family had built over 3 generations of ruthless real estate deals and shrewd investments. In the 2 years they had been married, Amelia had learned to read the weather in his posture. Tonight, a storm was brewing. "Is your mother expecting us soon?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. Jay didn't turn. "She always is." The reply was clipped, devoid of warmth. This was the new Jay. A man who had been emerging over the last few months, slowly replacing the charming, attentive man she had fallen in love with. The old Jay would have walked over, wrapped his arms around her, and whispered reassurances about surviving another Croft family dinner. This Jay remained a distant silhouette against the dying sun. "I was thinking," Amelia ventured, forcing a brightness she didn't feel. "Maybe after the dinner, we could start seriously looking at the color swatches for the nursery. I found a lovely shade of sage green, very calming." "Amelia, please." He cut her off, finally turning. His face, usually handsome and open, was a mask of strained politeness. "Can we not talk about nurseries and paint colors right now?" The words stung a small, sharp jab to her heart. Everything about their baby, a boy they had both eagerly anticipated, now seemed to irritate him. His excitement had evaporated, replaced by a brooding suspicion she couldn't comprehend. He had stopped touching her belly, stopped talking to their son in low, rumbling tones at night. He had started coming home late, smelling of expensive whiskey and an unspoken distance that was more intoxicating and dangerous than any perfume. "Of course," she murmured, retreating. "I'm sorry, it's just this dinner. You know how she gets." She was Eleanor Croft Jay's mother, a woman of formidable elegance and even more formidable will. Eleanor had never believed Amelia, a former art curator with a middle-class background, was a suitable match for her firstborn son, the heir to the Croft consolidated empire. She saw Amelia not as a daughter-in-law, but as an acquisition that had failed to appreciate in value. Her disapproval was a constant, low-frequency hum beneath the surface of their lives, a hum that had grown louder and more distorted since the announcement of Amelia's pregnancy. "I can handle my mother," Jay said, straightening his tie with a sharp tug. "Just be agreeable tonight. Don't start any debates about politics or art. Don't give her any ammunition." "When have I ever?" Amelia asked the question, laced with a weariness that went bone deep. She had spent 2 years biting her tongue, smiling through thinly veiled insults, and dressing in the muted, expensive styles Eleanor approved of. She had contorted herself into the perfect, unthreatening ornament, all for the sake of peace, all for the love of Jay. But the peace had evaporated anyway. The drive to the Croft family estate in Lake Forest was a silent, suffocating affair. The city's gleaming towers gave way to manicured suburbs and then to sprawling, gated properties hidden behind walls of old stone and older money. The Croft estate was the grandest of them all, a stone behemoth that seemed to command the landscape its perfectly symmetrical facade, staring out at Lake Michigan with an air of cold authority. As Jay steered the Bentley up the long gravel driveway, Amelia felt the familiar tightening in her chest. This house wasn't a home. It was a museum of a family's power, and she was just a temporary exhibit. They were greeted at the door by a silent butler who took their coats. The air inside was cool and smelled of beeswax and old money. Richard Croft Jay's father was in the grand drawing room swirling a brandy. He was a paler, quieter version of his wife, a man whose opinions had long been subsumed by hers. He offered Amelia a weak, watery smile. "Amelia, you're looking well," he said, his eyes flicking to her bump and then away again, as if it were a breach of etiquette. Ethan Jay's younger brother was there too, leaning against the marble fireplace. He was the family's designated black sheep, having chosen a career as a history professor over a seat on the board. He had a sardonic glint in his eye that Amelia had always found more comforting than Jay's polished perfection. He gave her a genuine smile and a quick conspiratorial wink, and then Eleanor swept in, a vision in navy blue silk, her silver hair styled in a perfect chignon, her neck and wrists glittering with diamonds that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. "Amelia, dear," she said, her voice smooth as cream, but her eyes as sharp as glass shards. She air-kissed the space beside Amelia's cheeks. "I do hope the journey wasn't too taxing for you, in your condition." She let the word hang in the air, freighted with meaning. "We were just talking about the upcoming charity gala. Jay, I've put you and your father down for our usual table. There's a new senator from New York I want you to meet." She steered her son away, her hand on his arm, seamlessly absorbing him back into the Croft fold, leaving Amelia standing awkwardly in the center of the vast room. It was a familiar maneuver, one designed to remind Amelia of her place on the periphery. Ethan pushed himself off the fireplace and ambled over. "Don't mind her," he said in a low voice. "She's just marking her territory. She does the same thing with the new topiaries in the garden." Amelia managed a grateful smile. "Thanks, Ethan. I'm just a little tired tonight." "I don't blame you. These family dinners are an Olympic sport in passive aggression," he quipped. "You're holding the family's grand air. You'd think that would earn you a reprieve. Apparently not." His words were meant to be comforting, but they only highlighted the central, terrifying question that had been haunting Amelia for weeks. Jay was avoiding her. Eleanor was treating her with more frostiness than ever. It was all centered around the baby. Why? The summons to dinner came moments later. They sat at the long, imposing mahogany table set with a dozen pieces of silver for each place setting. The conversation, steered by Eleanor, was a predictable tour of Croft Consolidated's latest triumphs, the failures of their political opponents, and the scandalous life choices of other less disciplined wealthy families. Amelia pushed her food around her plate, the rich aromas of roasted duck and truffle risotto turning her stomach. She could feel Jay's leg next to hers, but there was no contact, no reassuring touch. There was only a chasm of silence between them, growing wider with every passing second. She caught Eleanor watching her from across the table, a strange, triumphant gleam in her eyes. It was the look of a predator that knows its prey is already trapped. A cold dread colder than the air-conditioned chill of the room washed over Amelia. Something was terribly wrong. This wasn't just another unpleasant family dinner. This was an execution, and she was the one on the block. The main course was cleared away by silent, efficient staff, and a decadent chocolate lava cake was placed before each guest. It was Jay's favorite dessert, a small, cloying detail that made the tension coiling in Amelia's gut tighten into a painful knot. The conversation had lulled, and into that vacuum, Eleanor placed her bomb, wrapped in the silk of feigned concern. "Jay, darling." She began dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "Your father and I are concerned. We've noticed you haven't seemed yourself lately. So distant." She glanced at Amelia, a flicker of something sharp and cruel in her gaze. "We were hoping this wonderful news, the baby, would be a source of pure joy. But it seems to have brought a cloud over you." Jay placed his fork down with a deliberate, loud click that echoed in the cavernous dining room. The sound was a gunshot signaling the start of a war. He didn't look at his mother. He looked at his father, then at his brother, and finally his eyes, cold and empty, landed on Amelia. "It has," Jay said, his voice flat and hard. "It's brought a cloud of questions, of doubt." Amelia's breath hitched. Her heart began a frantic, panicked tattoo against her ribs. "Jay, what are you talking about?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. Ethan shifted in his seat, his brow furrowed. "Jay, this is hardly the time or place." "No, this is the perfect time, the perfect place," Jay said, his voice rising, gaining a terrible momentum. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the polished wood floor. He placed his hands flat on the table, leaning forward like a prosecutor addressing a hostile witness. Every eye was on him. "We're a family, aren't we? We're supposed to be honest with each other. We're supposed to protect the family name, the family legacy." Richard Croft looked pale and confused. "Son, sit down. What's gotten into you?" But Jay's focus was solely on Amelia. The man she loved had vanished, replaced by this cruel, theatrical stranger. "I've been doing some thinking, some investigating, and I've come to a conclusion that I cannot in good conscience keep to myself any longer." He paused, letting the silence stretch, wringing every last drop of drama from the moment. Amelia felt like she was underwater, the faces around her blurring the sounds of the room, muffled and distant. She could feel the blood draining from her face. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white to keep herself from swaying. "Jay, please," she begged, shaking her head, a silent plea for him to stop, to take it back, to not do what she suddenly horrifyingly knew he was about to do. He ignored her. His eyes, once her safe harbor, were now her executioners. He took a deep breath and delivered the killing blow, his voice ringing with a false, sanctimonious certainty that echoed off the high, coffered ceilings. The baby, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent, shocked room. "The baby she is carrying is not mine." For a single eternal second, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the frantic, useless beating of Amelia's own heart. Then the world fractured. Richard gasped, his hand flying to his chest. Ethan shot to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "What the hell are you talking about? Jay, have you lost your mind?" But Amelia couldn't hear them. All she could hear was the roar of blood in her ears and Jay's words replaying themselves over and over. Not mine. Not mine, not mine. It was an absurdity, a grotesque lie, so monumental she couldn't even begin to process it. She looked at Jay, searching his face for some sign of the man she knew, a flicker of doubt, a hint of regret. There was nothing. Only a hard, righteous conviction. And behind him, she saw Eleanor. His mother wasn't shocked. She wasn't surprised. She was watching Amelia with a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. A small, self-satisfied smile played on her lips, and in that moment, Amelia understood. This was Eleanor's masterpiece. This was her checkmate. The room erupted. Ethan was yelling at Jay, calling him a fool. Richard was trying to intercede, looking flustered and helpless. But Amelia didn't say a word. She couldn't. The lie was too big, the betrayal too absolute. It had stolen the air from her lungs, the words from her mouth. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she pushed her chair back, the legs screeching in protest. She stood up, her body trembling violently. She didn't look at Eleanor. She didn't look at the confused face of her father-in-law or the furious one of her brother-in-law. She looked only at her husband. She saw him flinch as her eyes met his. For the first time, a sliver of uncertainty seemed to pierce his armor. Her silence, her utter devastation was more powerful than any scream would have been. Without a word, she turned and walked out of the dining room. Her legs were unsteady, but she forced them to move one foot in front of the other. She walked through the grand drawing room, past the priceless art and antique furniture. She walked through the marble foyer, her footsteps echoing in the crushing silence that had followed her out of the room. She didn't wait for the butler. She pulled the massive oak door open herself and stumbled out into the cold night air. The gravel of the driveway crunched under her heels as she walked, her mind a blank slate of shock and pain. The world had tilted on its axis. The man she had built her life with, the father of her child, had just publicly disowned them both in the cruelest way imaginable. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had detonated it, leaving nothing but smoke and ashes. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stay. As she reached the end of the long driveway, the tears finally came hot and silent, tracking paths of cold on her numb cheeks. She was alone, pregnant, and publicly shamed. And somewhere behind her, in that cold stone fortress, her husband was being congratulated by his mother for destroying her. The headlights of the Uber cut through the darkness, illuminating a path away from the manicured prison of Lake Forest and back toward the anonymous grit of the city. Amelia sat huddled in the back seat, the buttery leather feeling cold and alien against her skin. She had directed the driver to her sister's apartment in Lincoln Park, the only sanctuary she could think of. The driver, a kind-faced man named George, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his expression a mixture of pity and concern. He had seen her emerge, sobbing, from the gates of the grand estate, a lone figure in a cocktail dress, and had discreetly offered a bottle of water and a box of tissues. Each sob that racked Amelia's body felt like a physical blow to her unborn son. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, a primal protective gesture. He's safe, she told herself, the thought a tiny, flickering candle in a hurricane of pain. I will keep him safe. Jay's words were shards of glass embedded in her mind. The baby isn't mine. The sheer calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't a private accusation whispered in the heat of an argument. It was a public declaration, a performance for his family, for his mother. The image of Eleanor's triumphant smirk was burned onto the back of her eyelids. This was her doing. Amelia was sure of it. For months, Eleanor had been planting the seeds, a casual remark here, a pointed question there. Are you sure of your dates, dear? Sometimes first-time mothers get confused. Jay seems so stressed. I hope you're not putting too much pressure on him. Amelia had dismissed it as the usual petty needling. She had been a fool. She had underestimated the depths of Eleanor's malice. Her sister Sophie lived in a third-floor walk-up that was the antithesis of the Croft estate. The apartment was filled with overflowing bookshelves, mismatched furniture, and the comforting clutter of a life lived with passion rather than for presentation. When Sophie opened the door and saw Amelia's tear-streaked face and ruined mascara, she didn't waste a second on questions. She simply pulled her sister into a fierce hug. "Oh, Ames," she whispered, her voice thick with immediate, unconditional support. "Come in. Come inside." Sophie, a sharp-witted journalist who had no patience for the pomp and circumstance of the Croft family, sat Amelia down on her worn velvet couch, wrapped her in a quilt, and pressed a mug of steaming chamomile tea into her trembling hands. "Tell me everything," Sophie said, her eyes flashing with a protective fire. "What did that bastard do?" Through fresh waves of tears, Amelia recounted the entire horrifying scene, the tense atmosphere, Eleanor's goading, and Jay's cold theatrical announcement. As she spoke the words aloud, they became real, their monstrosity solidifying in the cozy, safe space of her sister's living room. He said it. In front of all of them, Amelia choked out. His father, Ethan. He looked me in the eye and said our baby wasn't his. Sophie's face was pale with rage. That son of a bitch, that spineless, mummy-controlled walking trust fund of a man. How dare he? And let me guess, the Wicked Witch of Lake Forest was sitting there enjoying the show. Amelia nodded numbly. She looked pleased, like she'd won. Because she thinks she has. Sophie said, her voice hard. This has her fingerprints all over it. She's been trying to get rid of you since day one. She couldn't break you, so now she's trying to discredit you in the most disgusting way possible. And Jay, God, Jay, I never trusted him. He's weak, Ames. He let her poison him against you. Sophie was right. Jay, the powerful CEO, the man who commanded boardrooms, was utterly pathetically weak when it came to his mother. He had chosen Eleanor's approval over his wife and unborn child. The betrayal was so profound it was almost impossible to fathom. Flashbacks from their happier times ambushed her. Jay on one knee on a bridge in Prague, his face alight with love. Jay holding her hand during the first ultrasound, his eyes wide with wonder at the tiny, flickering heartbeat on the screen. A little Croft, he had whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Our son. Where was that man now? How could he have been so completely erased? What do I do, Soph? Amelia whispered, the mug rattling in her hands. He's shamed me. He's denied our son. My whole life. It's just gone. Sophie took the mug from her and placed it on the coffee table. She took Amelia's hands in hers, her grip firm and grounding. No. You listen to me. Your life is not gone. He did not take anything from you that you can't get back. He tried to shame you, but you have nothing to be ashamed of. He's the one who should be ashamed, and we are going to make him regret this for the rest of his miserable life. A spark of fight ignited within Amelia, fanned by her sister's righteous anger. Sophie was right. Crumbling was what Eleanor and Jay expected. It was what they wanted. "He has to know he's wrong," Amelia said, her voice gaining a sliver of its strength back. "I can't let this lie stand. Not for me. For my son. My son needs to know his father is a liar. But he is not illegitimate." "Exactly," Sophie said, her eyes gleaming with purpose. "So we don't wait for him to come to his senses. We don't beg. We act. We fight back with the one thing they can't manipulate or buy their way out of the truth." An idea born of desperation and a burgeoning fury began to form in Amelia's mind. A public accusation demanded a public refutation. Words against words wouldn't be enough. She needed irrefutable scientific proof, and she needed it now. "I need a DNA test." Amelia said the words tasting of power. "A paternity test. Not in a week, not in a few days. I need it tomorrow." Sophie's eyes widened, then a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. "Ames. That's brilliant. That is a power move." She grabbed her laptop from a stack of papers. "Okay, let's look. There have to be private labs that do rush processing. The kind of place celebrities and politicians use to solve their indiscretions. It'll cost a fortune." "I don't care," Amelia said, pulling out her phone to check her personal bank account. It wasn't Croft money. It was the money she had saved from her years at the gallery and a small inheritance from her grandmother. It was her independence. "I'll pay whatever it costs." For the next hour, they scoured the internet. They found a high-end private laboratory, a discreet service called Veritas Genetics, that specialized in court-admissible results with an expedited 24-hour turnaround for a staggering fee. They could send a certified phlebotomist to her location for the sample collection first thing in the morning. The only problem was getting a sample from Jay. "He'll never agree to it," Amelia said, the first flicker of despair returning. "He's convinced himself of this lie. He won't cooperate." Sophie tapped her chin, thinking. "We don't need his cooperation. We just need his DNA. A toothbrush, a hairbrush, a used glass." Amelia's mind raced. Jay was a creature of habit. Every morning he used the same electric toothbrush which he kept in the ensuite bathroom of their penthouse. He had likely gone back there tonight to their bed, as if nothing had happened. The thought of returning to that apartment, to their shared space, made her feel sick. But the alternative, letting the lie fester, was infinitely worse. His toothbrush. Amelia said, her voice firm with resolve. "He'll be at the office by 7:30. I can get in and out before he even knows I was there." "It's risky," Sophie said, though her expression was one of admiration. "It's necessary," Amelia replied. "This isn't just about my reputation anymore, Soph. This is about my son. When he grows up and asks about this, I need to be able to show him that his mother fought for him, that I did not let a lie define his beginning." The plan was set. Sophie made the call to Veritas Genetics, scheduling a phlebotomist to come to her apartment at 9 a.m. As the first pale grey light of dawn began to touch the Chicago skyline, Amelia didn't feel tired. The shock and grief had been transmuted into something else, something hard and sharp and resolute. She was no longer just Jay Croft's wronged wife. She was a mother on a mission, and this was a war she was going to win. The sterile, oppressive silence of the penthouse was the first thing that hit Jay. He had returned from Lake Forest after 1 a.m. half-drunk on his father's expensive scotch and his mother's toxic praise. He had expected to find Amelia there crying. He had rehearsed the cold, dismissive things he would say to her, the lines his mother had helped him craft. But the apartment was empty. Her side of the bed was cold and untouched. Her overnight bag was gone, A part of him, a small, frightened part he refused to acknowledge, felt a pang of something. Loss. Fear. He pushed it down, replacing it with the righteous anger Eleanor had so carefully cultivated. She had run. A guilty conscience, his mother had called it. Proof. Now at 6 a.m., nursing a throbbing headache and a stomach sour with regret. The silence was less a victory and more an accusation. The apartment usually filled with the scent of the flowers Amelia always kept, and the soft sound of her moving about felt like a mausoleum. He walked into the kitchen and saw the color swatches for the nursery, still sitting on the granite island, a splash of cheerful sage green in the cold monochrome space. He swept them into the trash with a sharp, angry motion. He showered and dressed for work on autopilot, the motions mechanical. As he was about to leave, his phone buzzed. It was his mother. "Jay, darling. I just wanted to check in." Eleanor's smooth voice purred through the phone. "I imagine you're feeling relieved to have finally gotten it out in the open." "I feel hungover," he grumbled, rubbing his temples. "That's to be expected. It was a difficult but necessary thing to do. You upheld the honor of this family. Your father is very proud, even if he's too timid to say it." A beat of silence. "Have you heard from her?" "No. She's gone." "Took a bag." Jay said the words tasting like ash. "Good," Eleanor said with satisfaction. "That's for the best. It's a tacit admission of guilt. Now the next step is to have our legal team, led by Mr. Davenport, draw up the divorce papers. We need to move quickly, Jay. We'll cite infidelity. We can be generous, of course. A small, quiet settlement to make her go away and relinquish any and all claims. Especially, she added, her voice turning to steel, any claims on behalf of the child. The word child jolted him. He thought of the ultrasound picture tucked away in his wallet, a picture he used to look at 12 times a day. He felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the scotch. "Right," he said, his voice hollow. "Davenport. I'll have him call you this afternoon. Chin up, my boy. You've just dodged a bullet. A very common gold-digging bullet. Now go to work, show them who's in charge. Remember who you are. You are a Croft." He hung up the silence of the apartment, rushing back in to fill the void. He felt sick. He remembered Amelia's face when he'd made his pronouncement. The utter shock, the devastation. There hadn't been an ounce of guilt in her eyes, only a deep, soul-shattering hurt. Could he have been wrong? He shook his head, chasing the thought away. The proof was undeniable. His mother had been so thorough. 3 months ago, she had first planted the seed. She had hired a private investigator, she'd said, concerned about Amelia's frequent lunches with a man from her old art world, a gallery owner named Sebastian. Then came the proof, grainy photographs of Amelia and Sebastian having coffee laughing, a single shot of him touching her arm. It was circumstantial, but Eleanor had woven it into a damning narrative. The final nail in the coffin had been the report from the investigator delivered to Jay a week ago. It included hotel records, a room booked in Sebastian's name at a boutique hotel on a day Amelia had claimed to be at a day-long art symposium. "She's a clever, manipulative little thing," Eleanor had said, her voice dripping with pity for her son. She thought she could pass another man's child off as a Croft to secure her future. "I'm so sorry, Jay. I'm so sorry you have to be the one to bear this." He had been blinded by rage, by a sense of betrayal so profound, it felt like a physical violation. His mother had guided that rage, aimed it, and helped him pull the trigger. As he was about to walk out the door, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was Ethan. Jay ignored it. He wasn't in the mood for a lecture from his sanctimonious younger brother. Ethan called again. And again. On the fourth call, Jay answered with a snarl. "What, Ethan?" "You're a coward and a fool." Ethan's voice snapped with no preamble. "I hope you're proud of yourself. You didn't just hurt Amelia. You destroyed her." "For what?" "To get a pat on the head from Mom." "You don't know what you're talking about," Jay shot back. "I have proof." "Proof? What proof?" "A folder of garbage from one of Mom's pet detectives." "Did you even talk to Amelia? Did you ask her a single question before you crucified her in front of everyone?" "I didn't have to. The evidence was clear. No evidence is clear when you only look at one side of it." Ethan's voice was raw with anger. "I called Sebastian this morning." Jay froze his hand on the doorknob. "You did what I know him, you idiot. My university buys art from his gallery. He's gay. He's been with his partner for 10 years. The symposium you were so suspicious of. It was a fundraiser for LGBTQ youth in the arts. I know because I donated to it. He and Amelia are friends, colleagues. He was helping her plan a surprise for you. A commission of a painting for the baby's nursery. From a new artist she's crazy about. That's why it was a secret." The floor seemed to drop out from under Jay. Every word from Ethan was a hammer blow, shattering the carefully constructed reality his mother had built around him. And the hotel, Jay asked, his voice barely a whisper. The fundraiser was held there. In the ballroom, Ethan said, his voice softening slightly with pity. "Jay, Mom played you. She's been trying to get rid of Amelia since the wedding. She saw an opening, and she drove a truck through it, and you handed her the keys." Jay sank onto a bench in the foyer, the phone slipping from his numb fingers. It couldn't be true. His mother wouldn't. She wouldn't lie to him like that. It was too monstrous, too diabolical. But as he sat there in the echoing silence of the life he had just annihilated, the pieces began to click into place. Eleanor's smug satisfaction. Her haste to get lawyers involved. Her complete lack of empathy. And Amelia's face, her beautiful, honest face, shattered with a pain so profound it could only have been born of innocence. He had made a mistake. A catastrophic, soul-destroying mistake. He hadn't just been wrong. He had been a monster. He had allowed his own insecurities and his mother's venom to curdle his love into poison. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He had to find her. He had to fix this. He scrambled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely type her name. He called her. It went straight to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He sent a frantic text. "Amelia, please. We need to talk. I think I've made a terrible mistake." No response. The message sat there, a single blue tick of delivery, a testament to his failure. He had built walls of wealth and power around himself his entire life, but at that moment, Jay Croft had never felt so utterly, terrifyingly powerless. He didn't know where his pregnant wife was, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he might have just lost her and his son forever. The email arrived at 10:17 a.m. It landed in Amelia's inbox with a soft, unassuming chime that felt cataclysmic. The subject line was Stark Veritas Genetics, Case VG743B, Expedited Paternity Results. Amelia and Sophie were huddled together on the couch, a fortress of pillows and quilts built against a world that had turned hostile. Amelia hadn't slept. She had spent the morning pacing, replaying the horror of the dinner, her resolve hardening with every step. The phlebotomist, a discreet and professional woman, had come and gone, leaving behind a small cotton ball taped to the crook of Amelia's arm, and a gaping hole of anxiety in the room. The courier dispatched to the penthouse had been successful retrieving the head of Jay's toothbrush from the master bathroom, an act of espionage that felt both thrilling and deeply sad. Now the truth was here locked inside a password-protected PDF. "This is it," Sophie said, her voice tight. "Are you ready?" Amelia took a deep, shuddering breath. Was she ready? She knew what the results would say, but seeing it in black and white felt like a final, irrevocable step. There would be no going back after this. The flimsy, fractured hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding that Jay would apologize for would be obliterated. This was war now, and this document was her declaration. "Open it," Amelia said, her voice steady. Sophie typed in the password. The file opened. It was a formal laboratory report filled with technical jargon, allele frequencies, and genetic markers. But at the bottom of the first page, in a bold, unequivocal summary, was the conclusion. Analysis of the DNA profiles for the alleged father, J. Croft, and the fetus demonstrates a genetic match. The probability of paternity is 99.9998%. Probability of paternity is 99.998%. The words seemed to lift off the screen. Amelia read them once, then twice. A single hot tear escaped and slid down her cheek. But it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of rage, of vindication, of sheer, unadulterated fury. The scientific, undeniable truth. Sophie let out a long, slow whistle. Well, there it is. The nail in his coffin. She looked at Amelia, her eyes searching her sister's face. "So, what's the plan? Do you send this to him? To his lawyer? Do you post it on every billboard in the city?" Amelia closed the laptop. The storm inside her had passed, leaving behind a calm, cold certainty. Sending an email felt too easy, too impersonal. This was not a business transaction. This was a reckoning. Jay had humiliated her in front of his family. She would deliver the truth to him in the very same arena. "I'm going back there," she said. "Back to the estate?" Sophie asked, her voice laced with alarm. "Ames, are you sure? To face that nest of vipers alone?" "I won't be alone," Amelia said, placing a hand on her stomach. "And I'm not the person who left that house last night." She stood up and went to the closet where Sophie kept a few of her things. She pulled out a simple, elegant crimson dress. It was a color Eleanor despised, a color of boldness and life. It was a declaration in itself. "I'm not going there to beg for him back," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound power she barely recognized. "I'm not going there for an apology. I'm going there for myself, for my son. I'm going to make them look at the truth. I'm going to make them choke on it." Meanwhile, at the Croft estate, a different kind of storm was breaking. Jay had driven there in a blind panic after his conversation with Ethan. He had stormed into his father's study, his face ashen, his hands shaking. "Where is she?" he demanded of his mother, who was arranging roses in a vase, the picture of serene control. Eleanor didn't look up. "Jay, your voice. There's no need to be hysterical. She's likely hiding out with that sister of hers, planning her next move." It's what her kind does." "Her kind," Jay echoed, his voice cracking. "Her kind. You lied to me. You lied about everything." Eleanor finally turned her eyes, narrowing. "I did what was necessary to protect you, to protect this family. You hired a PI who faked a report. You manipulated me. Sebastian is gay." "Mom." "The hotel was for a charity fundraiser." He yelled, the words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate torrent. Eleanor's composure finally fractured. A flicker of panic crossed her face before being replaced by hardened denial. "The man is lying to protect her. It's a conspiracy. Can't you see? She's turned them all against you." "No." Jay roared, slamming his hand on his father's antique desk, scattering a stack of papers. "The only person who has turned anyone against me is you. You've hated her from the beginning because she wasn't from some ancient inbred family with a summer home in the Hamptons. You couldn't control her, so you decided to destroy her." Richard Croft, who had been watching the exchange with a bewildered expression, finally spoke up. "Eleanor, is this true? Did you fabricate this evidence?" "I was protecting our legacy." She shrieked, her mask of civility completely gone. "That girl is a conniving nobody. Who knows what diseases she carries, what low-class bloodline she would be bringing into this family. I did it for us. For Jay." It was at that exact moment that the butler appeared at the door, his face impassive, but his eyes wide. "Ma'am, sir. Mrs. Amelia Croft is here. She is asking to see you." Jay's blood ran cold. Amelia. She was here. Before Eleanor could refuse, Jay pushed past her. "Let her in. Let her in now." Amelia walked into the drawing room. She wasn't the broken, weeping woman who had fled the night before. She stood tall and straight in her crimson dress, her chin held high, her eyes clear and focused. She held a single folded piece of paper in her hand. She looked magnificent. She looked terrifying. She ignored Eleanor and Richard. She ignored Ethan, who had just arrived, and was standing by the doorway, his face a mixture of concern and hope. Her gaze was fixed entirely on her husband. "Jay," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion, but a cold, hard clarity. "Last night you made an accusation. You did it publicly in front of your family. You called me a whore, and you called our son a bastard. You tried to shame me." She took a step forward, her eyes never leaving his. "You wanted proof. You put your faith in lies and whispers and grainy photographs. You put your faith in her," she said with a flick of her eyes toward Eleanor. A dismissal so complete it was more insulting than any invective. "You should have put your faith in me." She stopped directly in front of him, so close she could see the frantic pulse beating in his throat. "But since my word wasn't good enough for you, I got you something else." She held out the folded paper. Her hand was perfectly steady. "Here is your proof. From a state-of-the-art genetics lab. It's the truth, Jay. The scientific 99.998% certain truth." Jay's hand trembled as he took the paper from her. He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the page, his face growing paler with every word he read. He swayed slightly, as if the ground beneath him had given way. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a horror so profound it was almost inhuman. He saw not just the ruin of their marriage, but the ruin of himself. He saw the monster he had become. "Amelia, He stammered, his voice breaking. "Oh, God. What have I done?" Amelia didn't offer a shred of comfort. She simply stood her ground, a statue of righteous fury. You believed a lie because it was easier than believing in me, she said, her voice cutting him to the quick. And that is something this piece of paper can't fix. She turned her gaze to Eleanor, who looked as if she had been slapped. Congratulations, Eleanor. You won. You got exactly what you wanted. You destroyed your son. Without another word, Amelia turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the wreckage of the Croft family, the damning piece of paper lying on the floor where Jay had dropped it, and a silence more damning than any accusation. The silence that followed Amelia's departure was a living entity. It was thick with the poison of Eleanor's lies, the stench of Jay's weakness, and the sharp, clean finality of Amelia's judgment. The single sheet of paper from Veritas Genetics lay on the Persian rug like a fallen white flag, signifying the end of a war that had left no victors, only casualties. Jay stood frozen, his world completely upended. The truth he had just read didn't just exonerate Amelia. It convicted him. It convicted his mother. He looked at Eleanor, her face a ghastly collage of fury and fear, and he didn't see his protector. He saw a saboteur, a woman so consumed by her own prejudice and need for control that she had willingly sacrificed her own son's happiness to win a petty imaginary war. It was Richard, the quiet, passive patriarch, who finally broke the spell. He walked over and picked up the DNA report, his hand shaking slightly as he read it. He then looked at his wife, his pale blue eyes, usually so full of deference, now blazing with a cold, unfamiliar fire. All these years, Eleanor, he said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of decades of silent submission. All these years I have allowed you to run this family, to run my life. I stood by while you drove a wedge between our sons. I stood by while you treated that lovely, intelligent young woman with nothing but contempt. But this is monstrous. To do this to our own grandchild. To our son. He shook his head, a look of profound disgust on his face. I'm done. We're done. He turned and walked out of the room without a backward glance, the finality of his exit more damning than any shout. Eleanor was left standing alone, her empire of manipulation crumbling around her. Jay finally moved. He didn't spare his mother a glance. He bolted out of the house, his heart pounding with a singular, desperate purpose. Find Amelia. He saw her at the end of the long driveway, getting into Sophie's car. Amelia, wait! He cried, running his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. The car door closed, but it didn't drive away. Amelia got out, her face unreadable. She stood by the car, waiting a silent, imposing judge. He stopped a few feet from her, breathless and broken. Amelia, I am so sorry. I know that word is meaningless right now. I was a fool. I was weak. I let her poison me. I don't know what to say. There is no excuse. There is no justification for what I did to you, to our son. Tears streamed down his face, genuine tears of shame and self-loathing. Please, tell me what I have to do to fix this. I'll do anything. I'll leave my family. I'll give up the company. I'll spend the rest of my life earning back your trust. Amelia listened, her expression unchanging. The Jay begging before her was the man she had loved, but the image of the cold, cruel stranger from the night before was seared into her memory. There is no fixing this, Jay, she said, her voice calm and even. You can't unsay what you said. You can't undo the humiliation. You can't erase the fact that when you had to choose between my love and your mother's lies, you chose her. You didn't just doubt me. You sentenced me without a trial. She took a step closer, her eyes boring into his. The man I married would have defended me. He would have trusted me. That man is gone. Maybe he never existed at all. Maybe he was just an illusion I wanted to believe in. No, he's here, Jay pleaded, reaching for her, but she stepped back out of his reach. I love you, Amelia. I love our son. Do you? She asked, a flicker of her own pain finally showing through. You have a funny way of showing it. Love is not a weapon, Jay. And trust isn't something you can buy back with apologies or grand gestures. It's built in quiet moments, and you and your mother have bulldozed every single one of those moments into the ground. She opened the car door again. I'm not going to file for divorce tomorrow. I'm not going to fight you for money. That's what your mother would expect. Instead, I'm going to do what's best for my son. I'm going to go home to my sister's apartment, and I'm going to focus on having a healthy, peaceful pregnancy, something you have made impossible in our home. She paused, delivering her final terms. You will provide for your son. You will have a chance to be his father. But whether you will ever get a chance to be my husband again, that is a decision I haven't made. And it's not one you get to influence. You don't get to fix this, Jay. You have to live with what you broke. And I have to decide if I can ever live with you again. With that, she got into the car. Sophie gave Jay a look of pure contempt before pulling away, leaving him standing alone in the long, empty driveway of a house that no longer felt like a home. As the car turned onto the main road, Amelia didn't look back. She felt a profound, aching sadness. But for the first time in a long time, she also felt free. She had walked into the lion's den and emerged not only unscathed but stronger. She had lost a gilded cage and found her own power. The future was uncertain, and the path to forgiveness was long and perhaps impossible. But it would be her path on her terms. She placed a hand on her belly, on the tiny, innocent life that had been at the center of the storm, and she made a silent promise. His life would not begin with a lie. It would begin with his mother's truth. Amelia's story is a chilling reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those we vow to love, and that truth is a weapon no amount of money can ever silence. In the face of unthinkable public humiliation, she didn't just find her voice. She found a strength forged in fire, proving that personal integrity is the one asset you can never put a price on. She turned her deepest pain into her greatest power, emerging not as a victim, but as a warrior for herself and her son. What would you have done in her place? Could forgiveness ever follow a lie that, deep or is trust once shattered, gone forever? We want to hear your take in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of justice and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who appreciates a powerful comeback, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another unbelievable real-life drama.